We're not talking about dictatorships. Authoritarianism is a term political scientists use for a worldview that values order and authority and distrusts outsiders and social change.
Clean up your room. That's a good start.
Here's a rule. How about no makeup in the workplace?
A worldview that values order and authority and distrusts outsiders and social change.
Clean up your room. That's a good start.
How about no makeup in the workplace?
Testing people for authoritarianism is a bit tricky.
You can't necessarily just ask people, are you really freaked out by social change? Do racial differences unsettle you? Do you support strongman leaders? Because those are very sensitive questions and people won't necessarily answer them honestly.
So instead, political scientists ask people about something more neutral, their parenting preferences.
Please tell me which one you think is more important for a child to have: independence or respect for elders, obedience or self-reliance.
These questions seem like they're about raising children, but really what they're asking people is how much they value order and authority.
So when political scientists tested these 4 parenting questions against the behaviors that they knew authoritarians exhibited, they found out that the correlation was very close. It was very predictive.
Clean up your room. That's a good start.
For tens of thousands of people who are mainly young white males who are being rejected by society, he's the archetype of the loving father. He protects, directs, disciplines, and gives conditional love. He tells his children how to figure out what they value.
This is a process of soul searching. What are you oriented towards?
How to sort their life out.
Clean up your room. That's a good start. Organize your local landscape.
And how to improve themselves.
Stop saying things that violate your conscience.
Hell, he's even just released a book that's purpose is to advise people on how to live.
Understanding authoritarianism in America is complemented by the usage of Umberto Eco's essay, Fascism. Authoritarianism are both about defending tradition. They are both about the fear of change. They are both characterized by a mistrust in outsiders and minorities. Finally, they both claim to be defending masculinity from the irrational influences of the feminine.
Distrust of the intellectual world has always been a symptom of her fascism. From Goering's original statement, "When I hear talk of culture, I reach for my gun," to the frequent use of such expressions as degenerate intellectuals, eggheads, effort snobs. Universities are nests of Reds. The official fascist intellectuals were mainly engaged in attacking modern culture and the liberal intelligentsia for having betrayed traditional values.
And so since the 1970s, under the guise of postmodernism, we've seen the rapid expansion of identity politics throughout the universities. It's come to dominate all of the humanities, which are dead as far as I can tell, and a huge proportion of the social sciences. And we've been publicly funding extremely radical postmodern leftist thinkers who are hell-bent on demolishing the fundamental substructure of Western civilization. And that's no paranoid delusion.
Universities are nests of Reds.
We're not talking about dictatorships. Authoritarianism is a term political scientists use for a worldview that values order and authority and distrusts outsiders and social change.
There isn't an organized group of people who are getting together and saying, well, you're going to lead the assault on Western civilization and we're going to produce a new government out of the ruins. It's nothing that explicit and articulated, but the end result is much the same. And it's happening, well, I think it's already demolished the universities. So I think actually irreparably. I think whatever the universities are going to be in 15 years, especially on the humanities end, will bear almost no resemblance.
Degenerate intellectuals, eggheads, effort snobs. Universities are nests of Reds.
Authoritarianism is a term political scientists use for a worldview that values order and authority and distrusts outsiders and social change.
Elitism is a typical aspect of any reactionary ideology, insofar as it is fundamentally aristocratic, and aristocratic and militaristic elitism cruelly implies contempt for the weak. Fascism can only advocate a popular elitism. Every citizen belongs to the best people of the world. The members of the party are the best among the citizens.
And if you're bitter about everything that's happening around you, despite the fact that you're bathed in wealth, then there's something absolutely wrong with you. You know, the black community in the United States is the 18th wealthiest community 18th wealthiest nation on the planet. Now that doesn't mean there isn't such a thing as relative poverty, and relative poverty matters. It's an important political economic issue, and it's very, very difficult to deal with. But absolute wealth matters too. You know, the black community in the United States is the 18th wealthiest community, 18th wealthiest nation on the planet.
Universities are in nests of reds. Fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of the fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders.
We've seen the rapid expansion of identity politics throughout the universities. It's come to dominate all of the humanities, which are dead as far as I can tell.
The cult of action for action's sake. Action being beautiful in itself, it must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Thinking is a form of emasculation.
Fundamentals of truth are those that guide action. Clean up your room.
Were the Nazis left wing? The Nazis regarded themselves as National Socialists.
Vielleicht wird man unter Ihnen sein, der es mir nicht verzeihen kann, dass ich die marxistischen Parteien vernichte.
They say, well, that wasn't real Marxism.
Yeah, but that's
anyway.
not capitalism.
Oh, it's not true capitalism.
No, it's not even slightly capitalism.
Well, that wasn't real Marxism.
Undermining of traditional modes of being, including marriage, which, you know, has technically and historically been a union between a man and a woman, fundamentally for the purpose of raising children in a stable and an optimal and stable environment. So, and marriage has already taken a fair bit of damage over the last few decades. You know, poor people are increasingly less likely to be married, and that's really not good for them as far as I'm concerned.
Syncretism is not only, as the dictionary says, the combination of different forms of belief or practice. Such a combination must tolerate contradictions. Each of the original messages contains a sliver of wisdom, and whenever they seem to say different or incompatible things, it is only because all are alluding, allegorically, to the same primeval truth. As a consequence, there can be no advancement of learning. Truth has already been spelled out once and for all, and we can only keep interpreting its obscure message.
You know why you have color vision? It's because your ancestors were fruit eaters. And so it says in Genesis that what gave human beings vision was the snake in the fruit. Well, guess what? That happens to be the case. And then with regards to the pseudoscientific stance, let's say, of religious belief, let's look at the Taoist symbol for reality. Eh? Black paisley, white paisley. The black paisley has a white dot in it, and the white paisley has a black dot in it. What does that stand for? It stands for chaos and order. And the reason it stands for chaos and order is because that's actually what being is made out of.
The United States is full of authoritarian institutions. These include Fox News, Breitbart, the Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, von Mises Prager Education, and the entire prison industrial complex. More and more quasi-fascist and politicians are coming to prominence. Donald Trump has these tendencies, and Joe Arpaio and Sheriff Clark have literally killed prisoners and immigrants with their authoritarian policies. Jordan Peterson is to intellectuals what Arpaio and Clark are to law enforcement. He is Donald Trump if Trump would have become psychologist.
The fascist transfers his will to power to sexual matters. This is the origin of machismo, which implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality.
Jordan Peterson is a professor at the University of Toronto. He's written a lot about the decline of modern men. We spoke to him recently. Jordan Peterson, thanks for joining us. We've got a long list of statistics that paint a pretty clear picture that boys seem to be falling behind relative to girls in the United States. Why do you think that is?
I think that that's partly a consequence of directed policy. So it's linked to the idea that there's something wrong with masculinity, and so that the expression of masculinity should be limited.
This is the origin of machismo.
In all sorts of arbitrary ways. The fact that kids can't really play at schools anymore is a manifestation of that. The fact that male behavior is often diagnosed as attention deficit disordered, for example, is a manifestation of that. The elimination of competition as a valid form of human interaction.
So you're saying that there is an organized, not always explicit, but still organized attempt to de-emphasize masculinity or to punish masculinity. Why?
In the 1950s, Joseph McCarthy, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and J. Edgar Hoover all teamed up to not only imprison Marxists, but also have people fired from their jobs just for having pro-union sympathies. Jordan Peterson would love to have a Joe McCarthy around to lock up and fire the Marxists he disagrees with. In fact, Jordan has already sued 2 college professors and 1 college just because they hurt his fifis and disagreed with him. Jordan hates freedom of speech, and he's a hypocrite. The one professor who hurt his ego had to issue an apology for calling him an incel. Peterson loves the 1950s because women knew their place. Barefoot and pregnant making sandwiches. Naturally, he hates the 1960s because Marxists academics were the leaders of the civil rights movement. Peterson is the polar opposite of civil rights leaders like Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, John Lewis, and Bernie Sanders. Capitalists like Rebekah and Robert Mercer, Prager, Rupert Murdoch, and the Koch brothers are all grateful to Jordan Peterson for training an army of useful idiots who will believe socialism is about dictators and taxes instead of workers' rights and more freedom.